Hi, it's Astra. Enjoy listening to my new story. Have you ever spent 2 years watching someone plan the worst day of your life? And the strangest part wasn't the planning, it was realizing you'd been quietly making gyoza at midnight and building a federal case at the same time? The night my husband told me he wanted to evolve, I didn't cry. I made 87 dumplings and 87 decisions. He got every single thing he asked for. He just didn't know what was folded inside. That was me on a Saturday evening at the end of September, standing at my kitchen counter in Ashland, Oregon, with a pot of miso soup simmering on the back burner and my daughter's dinosaur placemat still damp from where I'd wiped it down after dinner. My husband was leaning against the refrigerator with his arms crossed, which is how Mitchell stands when he's about to say something he's been rehearsing in the car. His name was Wells. Commercial property appraiser, 42 years old. Owner of one Audi Q7, one landscaping polo collection, and zero ability to read a room. He was wearing the sage green pullover I'd bought him for his birthday. I remember that detail because of all the things I noticed about him in that moment. The pullover is what made me sad, not the speech, the sweater. He used the word evolve. He said it 3 times in under 2 minutes. I counted because counting is what I do when I don't trust my mouth. I think we both need to evolve, June. This isn't about blame. It's about evolution. Evolution. Like our 9-year marriage, was a species that had failed to adapt to its environment, and he was the meteorite doing us both a favor. He told me he wanted the house. He wanted both cars. He wanted the cabin near Crater Lake, the one we'd bought the summer Suki learned to swim, the one where the back porch smells like pine needles and wood smoke in October. He wanted the LLC, Wells Appraisal Group, every asset and account attached to it, and then he said, the thing I will carry in my chest for the rest of my life. He said, Suki should stay with you, obviously. Obviously. Like our 8-year-old daughter was an old couch that didn't match the new apartment. Like she was a subscription he'd forgotten to cancel. He didn't say it cruelly. That's the part that took me a minute. He said it the way you'd tell a mover which boxes go to storage, calm, practical, already thinking about the next thing on his list, which, knowing Mitchell, he absolutely was. Mitchell rehearsed everything. He once practiced a toast for his buddy Drew's wedding for 45 minutes in the bathroom mirror, and it still came out sounding like a man reading the back of a protein powder container. So when he delivered this little speech at my kitchen counter, I knew he'd been workshopping it, probably on the drive home. Probably in the parking lot of the Safeway on Siskiyou Boulevard, where he always sits for a few minutes before coming inside, thinking I don't know he does that. I knew he did that. I knew a lot of things Mitchell didn't think I knew, but we'll get to that. I asked him one question, just one. How long have you been planning this? He blinked twice. Mitchell's 2 blink was his tell. He'd been married to a fraud examiner for 9 years and never once figured out that I was reading his face the way I read a general ledger. Every twitch was a line item. Every pause was a discrepancy. A while, he said. I set down the wooden spoon I'd been holding. I told him I needed a minute. I walked upstairs. I locked the bathroom door. And then, and I want you to hear me on this, I did not cry. I sat on the edge of the bathtub, opened the Notes app on my phone, and I started a list. Timestamp, 8:51 p.m., item 1. Mitchell asked for divorce. Wants house, cars, cabin, LLC. Specifically excluded Suki from his list of demands like she was a Tuesday meeting he could reschedule. Then I went back downstairs. Mitchell was still leaning against the refrigerator. He hadn't moved. He looked like a man waiting for applause after a speech he thought had gone well. I walked past him, opened the refrigerator, and took out the pork and cabbage I'd been saving for tomorrow's lunch prep. He watched me. He didn't say anything. What do you say to a woman who responds to your divorce announcement by pulling out ground pork? I started making gyoza. I stood at that counter from 11 at night until 2 in the morning, and I made 87 dumplings. I rolled each wrapper by hand. I measured each filling with a tablespoon, the way my grandmother taught me when I was 9 years old in her kitchen in San Jose, back when she still had the strength to pinch the pleat shut with one hand. Each fold was a decision. Each pleat was a choice I was making while my husband slept upstairs in a bed that still smelled like my shampoo. 87 gyoza on 3 sheet pans lined with parchment paper. I stood back and looked at them, all those pale little half moons lined up in perfect rows, and I thought, that's it. 87 decisions. and not a single one of them was about saving my marriage. The next morning, Mitchell was already gone. He'd left a sticky note on the coffee maker. The note said, "Let's be adults about this." 5 words, 1 contraction, and an apostrophe he used correctly for once in his life. I peeled the note off the machine, read it twice, folded it in half, and stuck it inside the back cover of the notebook I keep in my purse. The notebook is small, black, moleskine, and I've been writing in it since 2017. Not a journal. I don't journal. I record. There's a difference. A journal is where you put your feelings. My notebook is where I put facts that might become useful later. Item 2. Mitchell told me to be adults about this. Underlined twice. I didn't underline it twice. I underlined it 3 times. 3 felt right. By 8:30, Suki was awake. She came downstairs in her pajamas with the little constellation print, the ones with Orion on the left knee, that she insists on wearing 3 nights a week because she says Orion is watching out for her while she sleeps. She asked me where Daddy was. I told her Daddy had gone to do some work. She asked if he'd be back for lunch. I told her I wasn't sure. She accepted this with the quiet efficiency of an 8-year-old who has learned that adults are unreliable narrators of their own schedules. Then she asked for waffles, and I made waffles, and we sat at the kitchen table and I watched her eat them with her fingers while syrup ran down her wrist, and I thought, this is the person he said obviously about. This one. This girl with the syrup and the constellations and the eczema on both hands that flares up every time the weather changes or the world gets too loud. After breakfast, I drove to the Rite Aid on East Main to refill Suki's eczema cream. The pharmacy tech was a young woman with a nose ring and the particular brand of cheerfulness that only exists in people who haven't yet been audited. She pulled up the prescription and asked me, "Wells or Nakamura?" "Nakamura," I said. "Always Nakamura." I'd kept my maiden name professionally for 9 years. Mitchell used to joke that it was because I didn't trust him enough to take his name. He thought he was being funny, he was being accurate. He just didn't know it. My name is June Nakamura-Wells, though the Wells part has an expiration date now, I suppose. I'm 35. I'm the director of internal audit at a company called Cascade Timber and Furnishings in Ashland, Oregon, which makes handcrafted furniture from sustainably sourced white oak and Douglas fir, which is exactly as exciting as it sounds. I spend my days staring at spreadsheets full of board feet and dovetail joints and inventory variance reports, and I am extraordinarily good at it. Not because I love wood, I am more or less neutral on wood, but because I love the moment when a number doesn't match, and I get to find out why. Before Cascade, I spent 6 years at a forensic accounting firm in San Francisco called Whitmore Chase, where my entire job was finding money that other people were trying very hard to hide. Tax fraud, embezzlement, creative invoicing, the kind of financial sleight of hand that looks like nothing until you pull one thread and suddenly you're holding a rope, and the rope is attached to something heavy, and the something heavy is attached to a man in a nice suit who is sweating through the nice suit. I'm telling you this now because it matters later. It matters a lot. I was very good at that job. I was the person they brought in when the numbers were clean but not clean enough, when the spreadsheets looked right but felt wrong. Wendell, my mentor at the firm, used to say I had the nose, not the head, not the eye. The nose. June, you can smell a bad number the way a sommelier smells a corked wine. You don't know why it's wrong yet, but you know it's wrong. Wendell said that to me on my second day at the firm, and it remains the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me in a professional setting. I left Whitmore Chase when Suki was 2 because Mitchell wanted to move back to Southern Oregon, and because the firm's hours were slowly turning me into a woman who could find anyone's hidden money except the hours in her own day. We landed in Ashland. I took the job at Cascade. Mitchell opened Wells Appraisal Group, doing commercial property appraisals across Jackson and Josephine counties. On paper, we were a pleasant, mildly successful couple in a craftsman house, in a college town with good restaurants and a Shakespeare festival. Off paper, I was a woman with a nose for bad numbers who had been married to a man with very, very bad numbers for a very long time. But I'm getting ahead of myself. When I got home from Rite Aid that morning, Mitchell had come and gone again while I was out. I could tell because his second favorite jacket was missing from the hook by the back door, the brown Patagonia that he wore to every single casual event like it was a personality trait. He'd also taken his laptop charger from the kitchen counter and left behind a single coffee mug in the sink, unwashed, because Mitchell had never washed a mug in 9 years of marriage, and apparently a divorce announcement was not going to be the thing that changed that. The soft demolition had begun. That's what I would later call it in my notebook. The soft demolition. The slow, clumsy disappearance of a man from a house he'd already mentally left 6 months ago. First the jacket, then the charger. Then, the good headphones, each item vanishing, like evidence being removed from a crime scene by someone who had never actually studied how to remove evidence from a crime scene. I stood in the kitchen and looked at the unwashed mug and the empty hook and the sticky note that was no longer on the coffee maker because it was in my notebook now, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. I felt relief. Not happiness, not peace. Relief. The specific, exhausting relief of a woman who has been holding a secret for 2 years and has just been given a reason to finally do something with it. I spent 6 years finding money other people were trying very hard to hide, and I was extremely good at it. My husband had been married to me for 9 years and never once figured that out. The next 2 weeks were what I would later write in my notebook as the soft demolition phase, Volume 2. Mitchell didn't move out so much as dissolve in stages. First, it was the razor from the bathroom. Then, the phone charger he'd already taken once and apparently needed a backup for, which meant he'd bought a second one, which meant he'd gone to a store and made a purchase for his new life, while still technically sleeping in his old one on alternating nights. Then it was the leather toiletry bag his mother had given him for his 35th birthday, the one he'd never actually used because he said it smelled like a department store elevator, which it did, but also it was a gift from his mother. And Mitchell's relationship with gifts from his mother could fill its own podcast. He started staying at a buddy's place. That's the phrase he used, a buddy's place. As if at 42, men in Southern Oregon have buddies with spare bedrooms and freshly laundered towels just waiting for a friend going through a conscious uncoupling. I let him use that phrase. I let him say buddy's place every single time because the version of me Mitchell needed to believe in right now was the wife who didn't ask follow-up questions. The wife who accepted things at face value. The wife who did not, under any circumstances, check the Venmo. I checked the Venmo. I do this once a month. I go through our joint Venmo statement, the way other people clean out their refrigerator. You pull out everything, you check the dates, you throw away what's expired, and you make a note of anything that smells off. It's a Sunday night habit. Glass of Pinot Gris on the counter, laptop open on the kitchen island, Suki asleep upstairs, and me scrolling through every transaction like a woman reading a novel she already knows the ending to. On the second Sunday of October, 3 days after Mitchell had told me he was bunking with a buddy, I found a recurring transfer. $2,100 a month, labeled office lease. The recipient was someone named B. Kavanaugh. I did not know any B. Kavanaugh. I did not know anyone whose last name started with CAV. I sat with that for about 15 seconds, which is approximately 14 seconds longer than a forensic accountant needs, to decide that a monthly payment labeled office lease going to an unfamiliar name is not in fact an office lease. I did the thing you should never do at 10 o'clock on a Sunday night, which is to type a name into a search bar and not stop until you're 4 browser tabs deep into a stranger's entire digital footprint. Bria Kavanaugh, 28 years old, receptionist. Worked at Marcus Enfield & Associates, a mid-size law firm in downtown Medford, run by a man named Marcus Enfield, who happened to be Mitchell's golf partner every other Saturday, the godfather of our daughter, and a man who had been to our Christmas dinner 4 years in a row. I want you to sit with that for a moment because I had to sit with it for about an hour. Marcus Enfield. The man who stood in my kitchen last December, holding a glass of the mulled wine I'd made from scratch and told me I was the backbone of this family. The man who had given Suki a stuffed otter for her 7th birthday and written in the card, "To my favorite goddaughter, from your favorite godfather." The man who had once brought a box of chocolate truffles from Costco to our New Year's Eve party, rewrapped them in brown craft paper, and told everyone they were from an artisanal chocolatier in Portland. I had watched him say the word artisanal with a straight face. I had watched him say it, and I had smiled, and I had put the chocolates on the dessert table, and I had not said a single word. The same Marcus Enfield, whose receptionist was now receiving $2,100 a month from my husband's Venmo account, $2,100 for a one-bedroom cottage in Jacksonville, Oregon, a town 15 minutes south of Ashland that is mostly known for its historic buildings, its wineries, and apparently, its availability as a convenient location for your golf buddy's receptionist to live in while your marriage quietly decomposes. I closed the laptop, I picked up the Pinot Gris, I took a sip, I put it down, I picked it up again, and took a longer sip. Then I opened my notebook. I wrote down everything. Bria Kavanaugh, 28, receptionist, Marcus Enfield and Associates, cottage in Jacksonville, $2,100 a month, paid from our joint Venmo, which meant paid with money I had legal access to, which meant paid with money that would show up on a statement that I could print at any time and hand to any attorney in the state of Oregon. I didn't say anything. I didn't confront him. I didn't throw his clothes on the lawn. I didn't call my mother. I didn't text my best friend. I didn't do a single one of the things that every movie and every television show and every well-meaning magazine article tells you a woman is supposed to do when she finds out her husband is paying rent for a 28-year-old receptionist who works for the godfather of her child. I wrote it on the list, item 6. Then I closed the notebook and washed my wine glass and went upstairs and checked on Suki, who was sleeping with one arm around a stuffed rabbit and the other arm stretched out across the empty side of the bed, like she was saving a spot for someone who wasn't coming back. I stood in her doorway for a long time. Then I went to bed. I did not sleep well, but I slept. And in the morning, I made pancakes, because I had promised her pancakes, and a promise to an 8-year-old is the only kind of contract I have never once considered breaking. That same week, I retained a divorce attorney. Her name was Carmen Aguilar, and she came recommended by a woman in my department at Cascade Timber who had survived what she described, with the 1,000-yard stare of a veteran, as a truly apocalyptic divorce from a chiropractor. She said the word chiropractor the way most people say the word hurricane. She said Carmen was the only reason she still had a house, a car, and the ability to sleep at night. She said, "Call Carmen. Call her before he does." I called Carmen on a Tuesday afternoon from the parking lot of Cascade Timber, sitting in my Subaru with the engine off, and the windows cracked because I didn't want anyone inside the building to hear me say the words divorce attorney while surrounded by inventory reports for white oak flooring. Carmen Aguilar was 39 years old, Chicana, born in Medford, raised by a mother who cleaned houses and a father who drove a delivery truck for a bakery in Central Point. She had gone to Berkeley on a full scholarship, graduated second in her class at law school, and returned to Southern Oregon because, as she later told me, someone has to be the scary one in a town full of nice people. She was 5'3" in heels she did not need but wore as a matter of principle. She had the kind of blazer collection that suggested she viewed courtrooms the way generals view battlefields. And she drank espresso the way other people drink water, which is to say constantly, aggressively, and without apology. I sat across from her in her office on a Thursday afternoon. The office was on the second floor of a converted Victorian on 6th Street in Medford, and it smelled like good coffee and old case files. There was a framed photo on her desk of her 2 daughters at the Oregon coast, and next to it a small brass sign that read, "No, I will not calm down." I laid out the situation. All of it. The Saturday night speech. The Evolve. The house. The cars. The cabin near Crater Lake. The LLC. The fact that he'd said Suki should stay with me, obviously. Like she was a houseplant he was generously leaving behind because it needed more sunlight than his new place could offer. Carmen took notes for about 90 seconds. She wrote fast, in a hand so precise it looked like it had been audited. Then she put down her pen, she looked at me, and she said, "Miss Nakamura-Wells, I am going to dismantle this man molecule by molecule. By the time I'm finished, he's going to be living in that Audi and appraising his own net worth at 0. I told her I appreciated the visual. I told her I could picture it clearly, and that the image of Mitchell sleeping in the back seat of his Q7 brought me a specific kind of warmth that was probably not spiritually healthy, but was nonetheless real. Then I told her I wanted to give him everything. Carmen's face did a thing I will treasure for the rest of my natural life. It was the face of a woman who has just been handed a loaded weapon, been told the target is standing right there, and then been asked to please put the weapon down and hand the target a gift basket instead. She set down her pen very slowly, The way you set down a pen when you're trying to decide if the person across from you needs a lawyer or a neurologist. "I'm sorry," she said. "Could you repeat that?" "I want to give him everything he asked for." "The house?" "Yes." "The cars?" "Yes." "The cabin near Crater Lake that Zillow currently values at $285,000. "Yes." "The LLC?" "Yes." "Miss Nakamura-Wells." "June, have you been sleeping?" I told her I'd been sleeping fine, which was true. I'd been sleeping better than I had in 2 years, actually, because the part of my brain that had been holding something heavy had finally been given permission to set it down. But I couldn't explain that. Not to Carmen, not yet, not to anyone. Carmen Aguilar needed to be a real divorce lawyer, arguing a real divorce, filing real motions, making real objections, doing all of the real things a real attorney does when her client is walking away from over $600,000 in marital assets. Because if Carmen knew the actual play, her face would betray her in under 3 seconds. And Carmen's face, God love her, was a billboard in a pencil skirt. Everything she felt at full volume, and it showed up on her forehead before it reached her mouth. I told her I was tired. I told her I just wanted Suki. I told her that fighting over a house and a car and a cabin and an LLC was beneath me, and that I would rather walk away clean than spend 18 months in a courtroom watching Mitchell pretend to be reasonable while wearing a tie his girlfriend probably picked out for him. Carmen narrowed her eyes at me for a long time. A very long time. The kind of long time that makes you aware of the clock on the wall. Then she said, "Fine. But I am putting it in writing that I advised against this. 3 times. In bold. With a footnote." "Bold is fine, Carmen. Skip the footnote." "I'm adding the footnote." "Carmen, the footnote is happening June. The footnote is the only thing standing between me and a malpractice complaint. And I love my license more than I love being right, which is saying something because I love being right more than most people love their children." I almost smiled. Almost. It was the closest thing to a smile I'd managed in 3 weeks, and it happened in a divorce attorney's office on 6th Street in Medford, Oregon, on a Thursday afternoon in late October, and I will take it. I walked out of that office and sat in my Subaru in the parking lot for about 5 minutes. I put my hands on the steering wheel. I looked at the dashboard. I looked at the little scratch on the passenger side of the windshield where Suki had accidentally hit the glass with a plastic dinosaur last summer. And I thought, you have no idea, Carmen. You have no idea what's actually happening, and I am so sorry I can't tell you, because you would love it. That night, my mother called. My mother's name is Yoko Nakamura. She is 63 years old. She lives in Medford in a 1-story bungalow with a small garden she tends every morning before sunrise, and she has been playing piano since she was 4 years old in a 2-bedroom apartment in San Jose where her parents, my grandparents, ran a dry cleaning business for 31 years. My mother teaches piano to 11 students ranging in age from 6 to 72. She makes mochi by hand using a recipe her mother taught her, which her mother's mother taught her, which probably goes back far enough that someone was making it in a kitchen in Nagano before anyone in my family had ever heard of Oregon. And she has the emotional volume control of a temple bell. Quiet, steady, and absolutely impossible to ignore once it starts ringing. Within 48 hours of Mitchell moving out, my mother had told my Aunt Fumiko in Portland, my Aunt Sachiko in Sacramento, her piano student Mrs. Greenbaum, who was 72 and had the information retention of a court reporter, the woman who runs the Saturday morning Tai Chi class at the Medford Senior Center, and a complete stranger at the Uwajimaya grocery store in Beaverton, whom she happened to meet while reaching for the same package of red bean paste. By Thursday night, half of the Japanese-American community in Southern Oregon knew that June's husband had asked for a divorce, and the other half would know by Sunday because Mrs. Greenbaum had a book club. My mother arrived at my door at 6:30 on a Friday evening, carrying 2 things. In her left hand, a lacquered bento box containing 12 pieces of homemade matcha mochi, still cool from the refrigerator, each one dusted with a fine layer of potato starch that left small white fingerprints on the black lacquer. In her right hand, a printed article from a Buddhist women's magazine titled, "Letting Go is Not Losing, Finding Peace When the Path Changes." She handed me the mochi. She handed me the article. She sat down at my kitchen table. She took both of my hands in hers, the way she has taken my hands since I was a girl, with her thumbs pressed gently against my knuckles, and she looked me in the eye and said, "June, you are going to fight him. You are going to fight him until that man understands what he threw away. Your father would have wanted you to fight." My father died when I was 19, pancreatic cancer, 11 months from diagnosis to funeral. His name was Robert Nakamura, and he was a civil engineer who built bridges for the state of California and who once spent an entire Saturday helping me fix a leaking faucet in my first apartment, even though he could have done it in 20 minutes by himself, because he wanted me to learn. My mother invokes him sparingly, and only when she means it. I told her I loved her. I told her the mochi was beautiful. I told her I would read the article. I did not tell her anything else, because telling Yoko Nakamura a secret is the emotional equivalent of posting it on a community bulletin board in 4 languages. She would not mean to share it. She would share it anyway. It would happen at Uwajimaya. It would happen over red bean paste. And then Mrs. Greenbaum would know, and then the book club would know, and then Mitchell's attorney would know. And then everything I had spent 2 years building in silence would collapse like a house made of potato starch. She left at 9:30. The mochi was matcha. It was, against all odds, extraordinary. The kind of mochi that makes you briefly believe that everything might actually be okay, even when you know it's not. I ate 3 pieces standing at the kitchen counter and put the rest in the refrigerator next to Suki's leftover macaroni and cheese, and the 2 containers sat there side by side like a small, quiet portrait of my life. Japanese confection on the left. Craft dinner on the right. Both made with love, both slightly inadequate for the situation. At 11 o'clock, I was in Suki's room. She was lying on her back with her arms on top of the blanket because the eczema on her hands had been flaring all week, and the cream I put on before bed made her skin feel, in her words, like a wet frog, and she didn't like the blanket touching it. I was sitting on the edge of her bed, rubbing a thin layer of the prescription cortisone onto her left hand, the one that was worse, the one where the skin between her fingers had started to crack in small red lines that looked like tiny rivers on a map of somewhere painful. She was looking up at me with that expression. The one that children make when they're about to ask a question they've been carrying around for days, turning it over and over like a stone in their pocket, waiting for the right moment, which is always the wrong moment, which is always bedtime. "Mommy?" "Yeah, baby. Daddy doesn't like our house anymore." "That's not true, sweetheart." "Then why doesn't he sleep here?" Sometimes grown-ups need a little space. It doesn't mean he doesn't like the house. She was quiet for a moment. I kept rubbing the cream onto her fingers, gently, the way you handle something you know is fragile. "Mommy, is it because the house smells like my medicine?" I want you to understand what that sentence did to me. I want you to understand that I have sat across from federal investigators and not flinched. I have found 6-figure discrepancies in corporate ledgers and not raised my voice. I have held numbers in my head that could end careers and not lost a minute of sleep. But that sentence, those 11 words from an 8-year-old girl with cracked hands in Constellation pajamas who thought her father left because the house smelled like her eczema cream, that sentence broke something in me that I don't think has fully healed. I told her no. I told her absolutely not. I told her the house smelled wonderful. I told her Daddy loved her so much. I told her this had nothing to do with her, nothing at all, not one tiny little bit. I said all of it. I said it with both hands holding hers, careful not to press too hard on the cracked skin. And I lied through every single word, because the truth, that her father had said obviously like she was a line item he was declining, was not something I was ever going to put inside that little girl's head. Not tonight, not any night, not ever. I waited until her breathing went slow and even. I pulled the blanket up to her chin, careful to fold it back from her hands. I turned on the small nightlight shaped like a crescent moon that she's had since she was 3, and I went downstairs. I sat on the bottom step in the dark for a long time. Then I opened my notebook. Item 9, written at 11:47 p.m., lied to Suki. Will spend the rest of my life making up for it. Start with pancakes tomorrow. Then I went into the kitchen. I pulled out the flour. I pulled out the pork. I pulled out the cabbage. And I stood at the counter in the dark, with just the light above the stove on, and I made gyoza until 2 in the morning, 54 this time. I didn't plan the number. That's just where my hands stopped. 54 dumplings on 2 sheet pans. 54 decisions. all of them pointing the same direction. The first week of November, I pulled the file. It lived in a fireproof safe in the back of my closet, behind a stack of wool sweaters I'd been meaning to donate to Goodwill for 2 years. The safe was a Sentry safe, $40 at Home Depot, the kind you buy on a Saturday morning when you realize you need somewhere to keep the things that actually matter. It was gray and heavy, and had a 4-digit combination that I'd set to Suki's birthday, because that was the only number in my life I would never forget, no matter what happened to the rest of it. Inside the safe, I kept the following items: Suki's birth certificate, my passport, the deed to the house, the title to my Subaru, a small envelope containing 2 of my grandmother's rings that I'd inherited after she passed, and a manila folder, standard size, office supply store beige, labeled in my own handwriting with 3 letters, LLC. I had built that folder 2 years ago. I had never told anyone about it. Not Mitchell, not Carmen, not my mother, not my therapist, and not my best friend Diana in San Francisco, who once talked me through a panic attack over FaceTime at midnight, and whom I trust with my life, but not with information that could be subpoenaed. My therapist knew about the time I anonymously sent a fruit basket to a coworker at Cascade Timber as revenge for a passive-aggressive email about printer paper usage. My therapist knew about the recurring dream, where I'm being audited by a talking heron. My therapist did not know about the folder. Nobody knew about the folder. Here's why it existed. In 2020, Mitchell's appraisal company, Wells Appraisal Group, LLC, had been sued by a former client. A developer out of Grants Pass who claimed Mitchell had overvalued a commercial property by roughly 15%, which had caused the developer to overpay, which had caused the developer to lose money, which had caused the developer to hire an attorney with a grudge and a billing rate of $350 an hour. The lawsuit wasn't enormous in the grand scheme of things. It was a civil dispute. Mitchell could have handled it with a decent attorney and a modest settlement. But Mitchell panicked. Mitchell panicked about the lawsuit, the way Mitchell panicked about everything involving paperwork and legal language, which is to say completely, immediately, and with the strategic planning of a man who has just seen a spider on his dashboard at 70 miles an hour. He came to me on a Wednesday night in March of 2020, sat me down at the kitchen table, the same kitchen table where he would later ask me for a divorce, and asked me to put some things in my name. Temporarily, he said, just to shield them from the lawsuit, just in case. The things were not small. The things were the house, both cars, the cabin near Crater Lake, and the LLC itself, Wells Appraisal Group, including every asset, every account, every liability, and every obligation contained within. I told him it was a bad idea. I told him that transferring assets to avoid a civil judgment could look like fraudulent conveyance. I told him a judge could see through it. I told him there were better ways to protect himself. I told him all of this clearly, specifically, and using the kind of language that a woman with 6 years of forensic accounting experience uses when she is trying to prevent someone she loves from doing something profoundly stupid. He heard none of it. Mitchell had the listening capacity of a man who had already made up his mind and was waiting for the other person to finish talking so he could repeat his original point slightly louder. I did it anyway. I signed the papers. I became the owner of record on every major asset in our marriage, including a commercial appraisal LLC that I had no involvement in running and no interest in managing. I did this because I was 30 years old. Because I loved him. Because Suki was 5. Because we were in the middle of a pandemic and the world felt like it was ending, and the idea of fighting with my husband about asset protection at a kitchen table while my daughter watched Bluey in the next room felt like more than I could carry. That's what you do when you're 30 and in love with someone. You do the bad idea. You sign the papers. You tell yourself it's temporary. You go back to making dinner and giving baths and pretending that the thing you just did won't matter later. The lawsuit settled quietly 6 months later for $13,000. Not a catastrophe. Not even close. And then Mitchell, being Mitchell, never moved any of those assets back into his name. He didn't ask. He didn't mention it. He didn't bring it up at dinner or in passing or during the annual tax preparation that I did every February at the kitchen island with a glass of wine and a spreadsheet that he had never once looked at. He forgot, or he got lazy, or he assumed I would remind him. Probably all 3. I never reminded him. I want you to understand why. I never reminded him because I am a forensic accountant, and forensic accountants do not remind people of things that might one day be useful. We note them. We file them. We mark the date and the context and the relevant parties, and we put the note somewhere safe, and we go on living our lives. It's not a strategy. It's not a plan. It's instinct. The same instinct that makes a squirrel bury a nut it doesn't need yet. You don't bury the nut because you know winter is coming. You bury the nut because you're a squirrel, and that's what squirrels do. So every major asset in our marriage was in my name. It had been in my name for over 4 years. And Mitchell had not thought about it once. 2 years ago, on a Sunday afternoon in February, I was sitting at the kitchen island doing our joint taxes. I had a glass of Pinot Gris, I had the QuickBooks file for Wells Appraisal Group open on my laptop, and I noticed something, a small thing. A single deposit that didn't match an invoice. $1,400 that had come into the LLC's operating account from a source I couldn't trace to any existing client file. I followed the thread, and the thread became a rope, and the rope became a noose that Mitchell Wells had been quietly braiding for himself for 5 years. But I couldn't tell you what was inside the folder yet. Not in that moment. I needed you to understand the history first. I needed you to understand why the folder existed. I needed you to understand that the woman who built it was not a vengeful woman. She was a careful woman who loved her husband and didn't want to believe what the numbers were telling her. And now I'm going to tell you what was inside the folder, because what was inside the folder is the reason you're still listening to this story. Here's what was in the folder. After I found that first deposit, the $1,400 that didn't match any invoice in the Wells Appraisal Group books, I did what any forensic accountant would do at 9:30 on a Sunday night with a glass of wine and a sleeping daughter upstairs. I started pulling threads. The first thread led to a second, the second led to a pattern, the pattern led to a system. And the system was so spectacularly unsubtle that I actually set my wine glass down and stared at my screen for 45 seconds because I could not believe Mitchell had been doing this for 5 years, and no one had noticed. But no one had noticed because no one had looked. And no one had looked because Mitchell's books were technically in my name, and I was the only person with both the access and the training to read them properly. Mitchell had been running cash commissions through the LLC and not reporting them. Referral fees from realtors, expedited appraisal fees from developers who needed numbers fast, consultation fees from property managers who wanted valuations done quietly and off the books. He'd been depositing them in amounts just under the reporting threshold, $1,400 here, $1,800 there, never enough to trigger a flag, always enough to add up. $365,000 over 5 years. He'd also been running personal expenses through the company. Dinners at restaurants in Medford and Bend, 2 wine country trips to the Willamette Valley that I'd been told were client development events. A 4-day trip to Cabo San Lucas that I'd assumed was a conference because he'd come home with a sunburn and a timeshare brochure. A custom set of golf clubs from a shop in Bend, $4,800, charged to the company credit card. I had never seen those clubs. Mitchell played golf with the same set he'd had since his 30s, or so I believed, because apparently he kept the new ones somewhere I wasn't. And then there was the rent. 15 months of payments to a 1-bedroom cottage in Jacksonville, $2,100 a month, listed in QuickBooks as satellite office lease. The Venmo was less careful. The Venmo said B. Kavanaugh. Everything was in the folder, 152 pages, QuickBooks exports, bank statements, credit card screenshots going back 4 years. A receipt for the golf clubs, printed from an email confirmation that had auto-synced to the family iPad, which Suki used to watch nature documentaries, which meant that one afternoon I'd picked up the iPad to put on a show about octopuses and found a $4,800 receipt sitting in the notifications like a confession that had wandered into the wrong room. I'd assembled all of it 2 years ago. Then I'd locked it in the safe and tried very hard to forget about it, because 2 years ago, I still loved my husband. And the marriage was, I thought, worth more than the truth. Now, I know what you're thinking. June, what kind of woman finds out her husband is running unreported income and laundering his girlfriend's rent through an LLC and just locks the evidence in a safe and goes back to making gyoza? The answer is the kind of woman who is 33 with a 6-year-old and is terrified of what the truth will do to her family. That's the boring answer. That's the real answer. I sat on it because I loved him, and because sometimes the smartest thing a smart woman can do is wait. Not forever, but until the waiting has a direction. I was done waiting. I laid the file out on my dining room table on a Tuesday night after Suki went to bed. I poured myself a glass of Pinot Gris in a coffee mug because all the wine glasses were in the dishwasher, and I called Ruth Okonkwo. I'd met Ruth at the Ashland Saturday Farmers Market 3 years earlier. She had a small booth selling lavender sachets, lavender honey, and lavender soap from the 3-acre farm she ran in Jacksonville. I'd bought a jar of honey. We'd started talking. She'd asked me what I did. I told her internal audit. She'd smiled a very specific smile and said, I used to be the one who came knocking. Ruth Okonkwo, 54 years old, Nigerian-American, born in Lagos, raised in Houston, educated at Howard. She'd spent 18 years as a special agent in the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. 18 years of finding people who thought they were smarter than the federal government and proving without emotion that they were not. She'd retired, moved to Jacksonville, planted lavender, and started a life that smelled like purple and had nothing to do with tax fraud. Except, you never really stop being what you are. You just planted in different soil. She picked up on the second ring. Ruth, I need to talk to you about Form 211. A real pause. The kind that means the person on the other end has just reclassified the conversation from casual to federal. Form 211 is the IRS whistleblower form. It is not a form you bring up over lavender honey. It is the form you use when you have evidence of significant unreported income and you would like the United States government to come collect. The whistleblower receives between 15 and 30% of whatever the IRS recovers. June, she said slowly. Are you in trouble? No. Mitchell is. He just doesn't know it yet. I explained the file, all 152 pages. It took 40 minutes. Ruth didn't interrupt once. She listened with the terrifying patience of a woman who has heard 1,000 confessions and is simply waiting for you to finish yours. When I was done, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Child, I want you to listen to me very carefully. Form 211 is not revenge. Form 211 is a federal action. Once you submit it, you cannot pull it back. The IRS does not have a return to sender option. You walk through that door or you don't, but you don't get to stand in the doorway. I told her I needed 48 hours. She said, Take them. Use all of them. And June, when you make the decision, make it with your eyes open, not your heart, your eyes. I gave myself 48 hours. I used every single minute of them. I spent those 48 hours the way you'd expect a forensic accountant to spend them, which is to say, I made a list. I thought about Suki. I thought about what this would do to her. I thought about what it means to be 8 years old and have your father become a headline in the business section of a local newspaper. I thought about parent-teacher conferences and soccer games and the small, merciless memory of children who hear things on the playground and carry them home like shrapnel. I thought about Mitchell's parents, Patricia, who had looked me in the eye at every holiday dinner for 9 years and called me family. Mitchell's father, Gerald, 70, a retired electrician who once drove 2 hours in the rain to fix our garbage disposal and refused to let me pay him because, he said, that's what dads do. I thought about what it would mean for Gerald to find out his son was facing a federal tax investigation. I thought about whether that information could survive inside a man who'd spent his whole life believing his son was good. I thought about what kind of woman blows up the father of her child over a number on a spreadsheet. And then I thought about the golf clubs, the $4,800 set from the shop in Bend that I had never seen, paid for with money hidden inside an LLC that was in my name. Those clubs were not golf clubs. Those clubs were the kind of purchase a man makes when he's building a second life and wants that life to have nice things. That receipt on the family iPad, next to Suki's octopus documentary, was not carelessness. It was contempt. The specific contempt of a man who believed his wife would never look. On Thursday morning, I called Ruth back. I told her I was in. She said, Okay, then we do this right. In the meantime, 2 other things happened that week, and both of them mattered. The first was a phone call on Wednesday afternoon from Miss Langford, Suki's teacher at Hellman Elementary. Miss Langford was young, maybe 27, with the careful voice of a person who has been trained to deliver difficult information to parents without using the word concerning more than twice in a sentence. She used it 3 times. She told me that Suki had been telling other children in the class that my daddy has a new house because our house makes him sad. She said Suki had been quiet during circle time. She said Suki had drawn a picture of a house with no door. She wasn't accusing me of anything. She just wanted me to know. She used the phrase, keeping a close eye on her. I was sitting in my office at Cascade Timber when she said that. I was looking at a spreadsheet of white oak board feet and hardware margins, and I felt my chest go cold. Not angry cold, not sad cold. The kind of cold that comes when you realize the damage is already happening, and it's happening to the person you were trying to protect. A house with no door. My daughter drew a house with no door. I added it to the list. I did not write down what I felt because what I felt did not fit in a notebook. The second thing was smaller, but it detonated louder. Carmen had forwarded me a copy of Mitchell's intake paperwork from Marcus Enfield's office. Standard stuff. Filing dates, case numbers, preliminary asset declarations. I was reading through it at my kitchen counter on Thursday night, mostly to check for errors, because checking for errors is my love language, when I noticed a name at the bottom of the 3rd page. In the small print section labeled Paralegal, Administrative Support of Record, there was a name, Bria Kavanaugh. I set the paper down on the counter. I picked up my coffee. I put it down again without drinking it. I picked the paper back up and read the name one more time just to be sure I wasn't hallucinating. Bria Kavanaugh was not just Mitchell's girlfriend. Bria Kavanaugh was the receptionist of record at Marcus Enfield and Associates, which meant Bria Kavanaugh had access to every file in that office, which meant Bria Kavanaugh had access to Mitchell's entire legal strategy against me, which meant that anything I told Carmen, anything Carmen put in a motion, anything Carmen wrote in an email or discussed on the phone or scribbled on a legal pad during a meeting was flowing directly from Carmen's filings to Marcus's office to Bria's desk to Mitchell's breakfast table. The leak wasn't a leak. It was a plumbing system. I sat with that for about 1 very long minute. I looked at the ceiling. I looked at the counter. I looked at the small scratch on the passenger side of my windshield through the kitchen window, the one Suki had made with the plastic dinosaur, and I thought about doors. Doors that only open one way. Doors you can't close once you've walked through them. And doors that don't exist at all, like the one in Suki's drawing. Then I made a decision that I am not proud of, but that I would make again every single day for the rest of my life. I started feeding Carmen fake strategy notes. I told Carmen I was devastated. I told Carmen I had no plan. I told Carmen I was considering asking for more time because I wasn't emotionally ready. I gave Carmen numbers that were wrong by just enough to be believable. I adjusted timelines. I emphasized my weakness. I built, carefully and deliberately, a version of myself that Carmen could present to the court and that Marcus could relay to Mitchell and that Mitchell could believe, because the version of June that Mitchell needed to see right now was a woman who had already lost. I hated every second of it. Carmen Aguilar deserved better than a client who was lying to her. Carmen Aguilar was a woman who had fought her way from a bakery delivery truck in Central Point to a law degree from Berkeley, and she deserved a client who trusted her with the truth. But Carmen Aguilar's face was a billboard, and billboards don't keep secrets. And the plumbing system that ran from her office to Mitchell's breakfast table did not have an off valve. So I lied to my lawyer. Add that to the list. I met Ruth at the lavender farm on the morning of Friday, November 15th. The farm was in Jacksonville, 25 minutes south of Ashland, on a 2-lane road that wound through hills the color of straw in mid-November. Ruth's property was 3 acres of lavender planted in rows so straight they looked like someone had laid them out with a ruler and a level, which, knowing Ruth, she probably had. The woman had spent 18 years organizing evidence for federal investigations. She was not going to plant lavender crooked. The main building was a converted equipment shed that Ruth had insulated, painted white, and turned into what she called her operations center, which was a word I suspected she used on purpose, because old habits are hard to break when you spent nearly 2 decades in a division that referred to everything as operations. Inside, there was a long wooden table, 2 chairs, a small electric kettle, and a shelf of lavender products in mason jars with handwritten labels. It smelled like purple. That's the only way I can describe it. The entire room smelled like the color purple had become a physical thing and decided to live in Jacksonville, Oregon. Ruth had already set up 2 folders on the table, 2 mugs of rooibos tea, still steaming, a pen, a highlighter, and a small dish of shortbread cookies she'd made that morning because Ruth Okonkwo was the kind of woman who baked before committing federal paperwork. She'd already started Form 211 on her end. She'd drafted a 4-page summary in the kind of cold, precise, emotionless language that the IRS responds to the way other people respond to love letters. She'd indexed our supporting documents. 48 pages, tabbed, color-coded, cross-referenced with the QuickBooks exports. It was the most beautiful piece of evidence assembly I had ever seen outside of a professional firm, and I told her so. And she said, "Child, I had 18 years of practice. You don't lose the hands." We started working through the form at 8:30. The form itself is short, the attachments are not. We were on page 22, deep in the itemized list of unreported deposits, when the door to the shed opened. I want you to understand the next 4 minutes, because the next 4 minutes were the closest I came to losing the entire thing. Bria Kavanaugh walked in. She was wearing a beige cardigan. Of course she was. Yoga pants, hair in a ponytail. The easy, unbothered expression of a woman on her lunch break running a quick errand in a small town where nothing ever goes wrong. She stepped inside and looked around with the pleasant curiosity of someone entering a boutique, not a crime scene. "Hi," she said, bright and friendly. "Do you sell lavender oil? My boyfriend says it helps him sleep." My boyfriend says it helps him sleep. My boyfriend. Mitchell Wells, 42, commercial property appraiser, owner of one Audi Q7, who was sleeping in a cottage in this very town that I was paying for, and who apparently needed lavender oil to help him rest at night, which I found cosmically, almost poetically, fitting, because I hoped he was sleeping terribly, and I hoped the lavender didn't help, and I hoped he lay awake every single night staring at the ceiling of that cottage and thinking about the word obviously. But I didn't say any of that. I had about 45 seconds before Bria's eyes adjusted to the room and started scanning the way people scan rooms, which is casually at first, and then with increasing specificity once something catches their attention. And the thing that might catch her attention was a table full of federal documents with her boyfriend's name on every 3rd page. Ruth saw my face change and understood immediately. That's the thing about working with another investigator. You don't explain, you adjust. Ruth stood up from the table in one smooth motion, moved the folders under her arm, and walked toward the shelf of lavender products with the unhurried ease of a woman who had simply been sitting at her work table doing farm inventory and was now helping a customer. She was magnificent. She became a farmer in under 2 seconds. "Of course, honey," and I quote in a small amber bottle from the shelf, "this one's our pure lavender essential oil, Oregon-grown, steam-distilled. You can put a few drops on a pillow or mix it into a carrier oil for a neck rub. Most people do the pillow." I was still sitting at the table that now had nothing on it except 2 mugs of tea, a dish of cookies, and my phone. I had moved the pen and highlighter into my lap without thinking about it. My hands were doing things my brain hadn't approved yet, which is what happens when your body decides it's going to survive a situation before your mind has finished panicking. Bria looked at me. She smiled. The smile of a woman filing away a face for later. "I'm June," I said, and I made my voice do the warm, slightly scattered thing that women do when they've been caught in the middle of something ordinary. "I'm a friend of Ruth's. She's been teaching me to make lavender soap. I'm terrible at it." Ruth laughed from behind the shelf, a real laugh. The kind you can't fake, which meant she wasn't faking it, which meant Ruth Okonkwo could genuinely laugh while hiding federal whistleblower paperwork under her arm. I filed that away as one of the most impressive things I had ever witnessed a human being do. Bria bought the oil. She also bought a small sachet of dried lavender buds. She said, "This place is so cute. I had no idea it was here." She paid in cash. She said thank you. She left. She got in her car. I watched through the window as she pulled out of the gravel driveway and turned left onto the road toward town. Then I put both of my hands flat on the table because I needed to feel something solid. Ruth walked back to the table. She set the folders down. She looked at me. I looked at her. "That was her," I said. "That was her," Ruth said. "She bought the sleep oil." "She bought the sleep oil." We sat there for another 30 seconds, saying nothing. Then Ruth picked up her pen, turned back to page 22 and said, "Now, where were we?" Because that's what you do when you've just survived a 4-minute earthquake. You go back to the paperwork. We were on page 31 when my phone rang. I looked at the screen. It was the front office at Hellman Elementary. The number that appears on your phone in the middle of a weekday and immediately rearranges every priority you thought you had. I picked up before the second ring. Suki was having an eczema flare, the worst one yet. Her hands had cracked open during art class, both of them, the skin between her fingers splitting along the same small red lines I'd been watching all fall. Except this time the lines had opened, and there was blood on the construction paper, and blood on the table, and blood on the sleeve of her sweater where she'd tried to wipe it away before anyone noticed. The school nurse had cleaned her hands and applied the cortisone cream from the emergency supply I kept in the front office, but the cracking was deep, and Suki couldn't hold a crayon, and the nurse was recommending I come pick her up. I stood up so fast I knocked over the rooibos tea. Ruth caught the folders before the tea reached them. She moved with the reflexes of a woman who had spent 18 years protecting documents from things far worse than spilled tea. I grabbed my purse. I told Ruth I had to go. She told me to go. She told me she'd stay right here in this shed with the paperwork and not move until I came back or called. She said it the way people say things during a crisis. Short, calm, no extra words. I drove to Hellman Elementary in 19 minutes. It should have taken 28. I do not remember most of the drive. I remember the parking lot. I remember the double doors. I remember the hallway that smelled like floor wax and hand sanitizer, and the particular institutional warmth of a building full of small children who are learning to be people. Suki was sitting in the nurse's office in a blue plastic chair that was too big for her. Her hands were wrapped in white gauze, both of them, loosely, the way you wrap something when you're trying to protect it without pressing too hard. She was holding a small paper butterfly that her art teacher, Miss Rodriguez, had folded for her out of purple construction paper. She was holding it with the tips of her fingers because her palms hurt too much to grip. She looked up at me when I walked in, and her face was the face that every parent of a child with eczema knows. The face that says, "I'm okay, but I was scared, and I didn't want anyone to see." I sat down next to her. I put my arm around her shoulder. She leaned into me. I was careful not to touch her hands. "Does it hurt?" I asked. "A little. It mostly just feels hot. We're going to go home, okay? We'll put on the good cream and watch something. Can we watch the one about the deep sea fish?" "We can watch the one about the deep sea fish." The nurse told me the flare had come on suddenly. She said stress could be a trigger. She looked at me over her reading glasses with the careful neutrality of a school nurse who has been doing this long enough to know when not to push. "Has there been anything stressful at home?" "No," I said, "just the usual." I lied to a school nurse about my child's medical care. Item 14. Add it to the list. The list was getting long. The list was getting heavy. Some items on the list were facts and some were sins, and I was no longer sure which column had more entries. We walked out to the parking lot. Suki climbed into the back seat of the Subaru. I was leaning in to buckle her seatbelt, trying to thread the strap without touching her gauze, when she looked up at me. She had that expression again. The stone-in-the-pocket expression. The one that means the question has been waiting. "Mommy, why does Daddy never come to our house to say goodnight anymore?" I want to tell you I handled that gracefully. I want to tell you I said something wise and comforting and therapeutically appropriate. I didn't. I said, "He will, baby, soon," which was a lie. And she knew it was a lie. I could see it in her face. 8-year-olds know when you're lying. They just don't have the words to call you on it yet. I closed her door. Gently. The way you close a door when you're trying not to let the sound give you away. I walked around to the driver's side. I sat down behind the wheel, and I cried for the first time since the last Saturday in September. Not pretty crying. Not the kind they do in movies where a single tear rolls down a cheekbone and catches the light. The kind where your face goes hot and your nose runs and your shoulders shake and you have to grab something to press against your mouth so the sound doesn't reach the back seat. I found a napkin in a brown paper bag from Breadboard Bakery on East Main Street. I pressed it against my face and I cried into it for about 5 minutes while my daughter sat behind me holding a paper butterfly with her bandaged fingers and looking out the window at the parking lot of her elementary school. 5 minutes. Then I wiped my face. I folded the napkin, I started the car, I said, "Okay, baby, let's go watch those fish." And I drove my daughter home. I went back to the farm that afternoon. Ruth was still in the shed. She had eaten half a blueberry scone and read 2 chapters of a paperback about lavender distillation techniques. The folders were exactly where we'd left them. The tea had been cleaned up. A fresh mug was waiting for me. We finished Form 211 at 4:15 p.m. on Friday, November 15th. 48 pages of supporting documentation, indexed, tabbed, and cross-referenced. Ruth's 4-page summary, written in language so cold and precise it could have frozen a courtroom. My signature on every page that required one. Ruth submitted it electronically that night from her kitchen table in Jacksonville while eating leftover jollof rice and listening to Sade. She told me this the next morning. She said, "I thought the moment deserved good music." The clock started ticking, and here's the thing about clocks. They don't care if you're ready. Okay, I need to pause for a second. Just a second, because I have something I want to say to you, and it doesn't fit inside the story. If you're still here with me, if you've stayed through the gyoza and the lavender oil and the gauze on my daughter's hands, thank you. I mean that more than I know how to say. There are about a million things you could be doing right now, and you chose to spend this time with me, with this mess of a year, and I don't take that lightly. If this story has landed somewhere inside you, if it's sitting in a place that feels familiar, do me one small thing. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and down in the comments, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. I read every single one. Last week, someone was listening at 4 in the morning from a town in northern Maine that I'd never heard of, and it made my entire day. I want to know who you are and where you are. Thank you, truly. Thank you. All right, back to it, because what happened next is where the plan met the room. The settlement conference was scheduled for Thursday, December 5th at 2 in the afternoon in a conference room on the 6th floor of a building in downtown Medford that smelled like new carpet and old ambition. The kind of building where men go to feel important and women go to do the actual work. I wore a navy blazer. I'd bought it at a consignment shop on East Main Street in Ashland for $11. $11. Carmen had told me to wear something neutral and slightly defeated. I'd stared at her over my coffee and said, "Carmen, my entire wardrobe looks like I'm about to audit someone into next week. The Navy is the closest thing I have to defeated." She'd almost smiled. Almost. It was the second almost smile I'd earned from her, and I was keeping count. Mitchell was already in the room when we arrived. So was Marcus Enfield. Marcus was wearing a tie with little golf clubs on it. Little actual golf clubs, printed on silk, repeated in a pattern that suggested the tie had been designed by someone who wanted to make absolutely sure you knew the wearer played golf. The kind of tie a man buys himself at an airport gift shop and then wears unironically to a settlement conference where he is about to help his client take $600,000 from the mother of his goddaughter. He shook my hand. The handshake was warm. The handshake was the handshake of a man who had already mentally deposited the check. Mitchell didn't shake my hand. Mitchell gave me a small nod, the kind of nod you give a stranger in an elevator when you're both pretending you didn't hear the other one's stomach growl. We sat down. Marcus slid a stack of paperwork across the table. He cleared his throat with a small theatrical cough, the kind of cough men produce when they're about to enjoy themselves. "So," he said, "we'd like to walk through our proposed terms." He walked through the terms. The terms were exactly what Mitchell had announced in my kitchen on that Saturday night in September. The house, both cars, the cabin near Crater Lake, the LLC. Mitchell would assume 100% of the marital assets contained therein. June would retain her personal vehicle, her personal retirement accounts, and full physical custody of Suki, with Mitchell receiving weekend visitation. Marcus used the word generous twice. He said it like a man who had never been told no by a woman who meant it. Carmen's pen was tapping against her legal pad. I could feel her vibrating. Carmen vibrated the way a tuning fork vibrates, at a frequency that only people who were about to get hurt could detect. I put my hand on her wrist under the table. Just for a second. Just enough. "That sounds reasonable to me," I said. The room went silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silent where you can hear the carpet fibers thinking about rearranging themselves. Marcus blinked. "I'm sorry?" "That sounds reasonable. I accept the terms." Marcus looked at Mitchell. Mitchell looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at me, then at Carmen, then back at me, like a man trying to find the trapdoor in a magic trick he didn't buy a ticket for. Carmen said very tightly, "My client would like to take a brief recess to confer." We went into the hallway. Carmen waited until the door clicked shut. Then she turned on me with the compressed fury of a woman who had been preparing to unsheath a sword and had just been handed a participation ribbon. June, look at me. I had 2 forensic CPAs on standby. I had a private investigator who has been waiting by his phone for 3 weeks. I had a draft motion in my briefcase right now, right here in this bag, that would have made that man wish he had never learned the word appraisal. What are you doing? What I told you I was doing. You're tired. You're traumatized. You are not in a state to make a $600,000 decision in a hallway that smells like someone reheated salmon in the break room. Carmen, just trust me. I wanted to tell her. God, I wanted to tell her. I wanted to put my hands on her shoulders and say, Carmen, listen to me. In 3 weeks, the IRS is going to descend on Wells Appraisal Group like it's a bouncy castle at a children's birthday party, and I am giving Mitchell the bouncy castle on purpose. But I couldn't. Because if Carmen's face changed by even half a degree when she walked back into that room, Marcus would see it. Marcus was a lazy lawyer, but lazy lawyers survive by smelling things. And Carmen's face was a billboard. I told her I was sure. She stared at me for a long time. Then she did something I will never forget. She straightened her blazer. She lifted her chin. And she walked back into that conference room as a woman who was about to lose a war on purpose for a client who had refused to explain why. That is what a real professional looks like. That is integrity in a navy pencil skirt. We signed the preliminary agreement at 2:45. Marcus practically high-fived Mitchell in the hallway. Mitchell patted his lawyer on the back like they'd just won a tournament. He didn't look at me on the way out. Not once. And I let him not look. Because the version of me he needed to believe in was the woman who had just lost everything, and that woman wouldn't be watching. I made it to the parking garage. I made it to my car. I sat down in the driver's seat of the Subaru, and then everything went very, very quiet. The garage was on the 3rd level of the building, the kind of concrete structure where every sound bounces off the walls and comes back slightly worse than it left. A car door closing on level 1 sounds like a gunshot on level 3. The fluorescent light above my parking spot was buzzing at a frequency that seemed to be personally targeting my left temple. There was a yellow safety bumper on the back wall of the parking spot with black scuff marks on it where people had pulled in too hard. I counted the scuffs. There were 5. I counted them 3 times because counting is the thing I do when everything else has stopped working. I sat there for 45 minutes. I did not cry. I did not move. I put my hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, the way my father taught me when I was 15 in the parking lot of a Safeway in San Jose, and I stared at those 5 scuff marks, and I let my brain do the thing it had been refusing to do for the last 3 hours, which was feel. Somewhere around minute 33, a thought arrived. Not a good thought, not a productive thought, the kind of thought that shows up uninvited and sits down in the only chair in the room. I can stop this. I could call Ruth. I could ask her if there was a way to withdraw the filing. There probably wasn't, but I could ask. I could call the IRS directly. I could say there had been a misunderstanding. I could let Mitchell walk away with the house and the cars and the cabin and the LLC and the golf clubs and all of it. And Suki would still have a father who showed up on weekends. And Patricia would still have a son who wasn't under investigation. And Gerald would never have to know. And the world would keep turning and nobody would have to find out what I had nearly done. Nearly done. I was already using the word nearly, as if the filing hadn't happened, as if Ruth hadn't submitted it 3 weeks ago from her kitchen table while listening to Sade, as if the IRS had a pause button. I picked up my phone. I called Carmen. She answered on the first ring. Are you okay? Carmen, I need to ask you something hypothetical. No, you haven't heard the question. I don't need to hear the question. I have been a divorce attorney for 12 years, and the words hypothetical question are how every single one of my worst months has started. But go ahead. If a person had set something in motion, a legal something, a federal legal something, and that person changed her mind, could she stop it? There was a long pause, the kind of pause where you can hear someone choosing their words the way a surgeon chooses instruments. June, what did you do? Nothing. It's hypothetical. It is so profoundly not hypothetical that I can feel it being not hypothetical through the phone. Could she stop it? Another pause. Longer. Then, very carefully, it depends on what it is, but almost certainly no. And June, listen to me. Whatever you did, if you did it because you had a reason, the reason was probably real when you had it. Trust the version of you who made the call. The version of you sitting in a parking garage at 4:30 in the afternoon after signing away a house is not the version of you I would let make decisions about what to have for dinner, much less a federal legal something. How did you know I'm in a parking garage? Because that's where women go after they sign things they don't want to explain. Go home, hold your daughter, call me tomorrow. I said, okay. I hung up. I drove home. Mitchell's Audi was in my driveway when I pulled in. 2 hours early. He came out of the house holding Suki's overnight bag and a smile I hadn't seen before. The new smile. The post-conference smile. The smile of a man who believes he has just won something significant and is trying not to let it show, which is the same thing as letting it show. Hey, figured I'd grab her a little early since everything went so smoothly today. Mitchell, we agreed on 6. It's fine, right? Come on, we're celebrating. He caught himself a half second too late. I mean, it's been a long day. She and I are going to get pizza. I let him into the kitchen. I went upstairs to help Suki find her other sneaker, which was under the couch in the den, because the laws of physics do not apply to 8-year-old girls' shoes. When I came back down 2 minutes later, Mitchell was standing at the kitchen island, and my laptop was open on the counter, and he was looking at it. I had left a tab open. The tab was labeled in plain text across the top of the browser, IRS Form 211 Whistleblower Award Program. He hadn't clicked on it, but he had read the title. I could see it in his face. His face had gone slightly still, the kind of still that happens when a person is doing math they didn't expect to be doing. I walked over and closed the laptop. Casually, the way you close a laptop when you've been looking at something boring and are happy to stop. God, sorry, I said in the flat, exhausted voice of a woman complaining about her job. I've been buried in compliance research all week. We've got a timber vendor at Cascade who might have been inflating import invoices on a federal forestry contract, and our auditor wants me to understand the reporting framework in case we have to escalate. It is so dry I could fall asleep standing up. Mitchell's face did not move for 1 full second. Then it relaxed, not all the way. About 80% of the way, which, if you're a forensic accountant, means 20% of his brain was still running the math. That sounds awful, he said. It's the worst. I'd rather be doing literally anything else, including this conversation. He laughed, a small, short laugh. He took Suki's bag. He kissed Suki on the head. He told me he'd have her back Sunday by 6. He left. I stood at the kitchen window and watched the Audi pull out of the driveway. His shoulders were a little too straight. His head was a little too still. The posture of a man who was trying very hard not to look like he was thinking. He hadn't fully bought it. I could feel it the way you feel weather changing before the clouds arrive. And the thing about Mitchell is that when he doesn't fully buy something, he doesn't let go of it. He watches. He waits. He watches some more. He spent the next 2 days watching me. I know he was watching me because I could feel it. I have been watched before. In my line of work, people watch you when they suspect you know something. The watching has a weight to it, a specific kind of attention that lands on the back of your neck, like a hand that isn't touching you, but wants you to know it could. Mitchell was doing that. He was doing it the way Mitchell does everything, which is to say he thought he was being subtle and he was not being subtle at all. On Saturday morning, Suki's school held its winter concert. 22 second graders on a makeshift stage in the Hellman Elementary Gymnasium, wearing paper snowflakes pinned to their shirts, and the unshakable confidence of children who have rehearsed a song 11 times and believe they have mastered it. The gymnasium smelled like floor polish and juice boxes and the particular nervous energy of 40 parents trying to record video on their phones while pretending to be present. They sang Frosty the Snowman. They sang it with the kind of full-throated commitment that only 7- and 8-year-olds can produce, the kind where every word is delivered at maximum volume regardless of whether it's the right word, and where the hand motions are approximately 2 beats behind the music but executed with absolute certainty. Suki was in the second row, third from the left, wearing a green sweater I'd bought her at the Target in Medford and a paper snowflake the size of a dinner plate. She was singing so hard her entire body was moving. Mitchell was sitting 3 rows behind me. I could feel his eyes on the back of my head the entire performance. I sang along. I clapped at the right moments. I waved at Suki when she found me in the crowd, and her face lit up the way. Only a child's face lights up when they spot their person in a sea of adults, which is to say completely and without any of the self-consciousness that the rest of us spend our entire lives accumulating. I have never worked so hard to look bored in my entire life. Lip-syncing Frosty the Snowman while quietly executing the most consequential financial maneuver of your career is not something I would recommend to anyone. But if you ever find yourself in that position, here's what I learned. Stay on the thumpity-thump-thump part. Nobody can read your face during thumpity-thump-thump. It's physically impossible. The syllables require too much facial commitment. Your mouth has to do too many things in too short a time. It's the perfect cover. Thumpity-thump-thump, thumpity-thump-thump-thump, look at Frosty go. Nobody is decoding your federal whistleblower strategy during that line. Nobody. After the concert, there were cookies. There are always cookies. The cookies were on a folding table near the door, arranged on paper plates by the PTA, with the kind of decorative precision that suggests at least 2 women had a disagreement about placement. I was reaching for a snickerdoodle when Mitchell's mother appeared beside me. Patricia Wells, 67 years old, retired dental hygienist, the kind of woman whose Christmas cards arrive in November and include a single-spaced, double-sided family newsletter typed in a font she has used since 1998. She was wearing a red cardigan with small pearl buttons and an expression that I had never seen on her face before, which was something close to tenderness, which was something close to apology, which was something I did not know what to do with. She put her hand on my arm. She looked me directly in the eye, and she said, very quietly, so that only I could hear, "June, I want you to know something. I always knew you were the strong one." I did not know what to do with that sentence. I still don't. I have turned it over in my head at least 100 times since she said it, and I still don't know if it was a compliment or a confession or an apology or all 3 folded together like one of Suki's paper snowflakes. I don't know if Patricia knew about Bria. I don't know if Patricia knew about the cottage in Jacksonville. I don't know if Patricia knew anything at all, or if she simply knew her son the way mothers know their sons, which is to say, incompletely and with a love that has learned to look away from certain things. I gave her a small smile. I said, "Thank you, Patricia," and I walked away holding a snickerdoodle I did not eat. I drove Suki home. She fell asleep in the back seat before we reached the second stoplight, which is her personal record, and also completely predictable, because she had just spent 45 minutes performing at a volume that would have concerned an acoustics engineer. She was holding a paper snowflake that her friend Lily had made for her. Her mouth was slightly open. There was a small red mark on her left hand where the eczema cream had dried into the cracked skin. She looked exactly like Mitchell. I had seen the baby photos 100 times, framed on Patricia's hallway wall, and the resemblance was the kind that makes you catch your breath if you look at it too long. The same jawline, the same slightly upturned nose. The same way of sleeping with one hand open and the other curled into a loose fist, except for the eyebrows, which were mine, and the stubbornness, which was also mine, and the hands, which were hers and hers alone, cracked and hurting and still holding a paper snowflake a friend had made for her because she thought it was beautiful. The doubt I'd been carrying for 48 hours went somewhere else. Not away, just somewhere I could set it down for a while, because it didn't matter anymore whether I was doing the right thing. The thing was already done. The only choice left was whether to walk into Tuesday as a woman who finished what she started or as a woman who got scared and tried to pretend she hadn't. I unbuckled Suki. I carried her inside. I put her on the couch with a blanket, careful to fold it back from her hands the way she liked. I went into the kitchen. I made a grilled cheese sandwich. I stood at the counter, eating it with one hand under my chin to catch the crumbs, staring out the window at the last bit of daylight disappearing behind the trees, and I thought one word. Tuesday. Just get to Tuesday. Tuesday came the way Tuesdays always come, without permission and without apology. December 10th. The Jackson County Courthouse is a tall stone building in downtown Medford with the kind of fluorescent lighting that makes everyone look like they've already lost, regardless of why they're there. The hallways are wide and the ceilings are high, and the floors are the kind of polished stone that turns every footstep into an announcement. It is the kind of building that was designed to make human beings feel small, and it succeeds. The hearing was at 10 in the morning. I got there at 9:15. I wore the navy blazer, the $11 blazer from the consignment shop on East Main. I had thought about wearing something else, something newer, something that didn't have a small pull in the lining near the left pocket where I'd caught it on a door handle at Cascade Timber. But the blazer had gotten me through the settlement conference, and it had gotten me through 3 weeks of waiting. And superstition is not something I generally believe in, but I was not about to test that theory on the morning I was ending my marriage. I drank a cup of coffee in the courthouse cafeteria. I do not remember what it tasted like. I think it tasted like fluorescent lighting, if fluorescent lighting had a flavor, which in that building it probably did. Carmen met me in the lobby at 9:40. She was wearing a charcoal blazer and heels that could have been classified as a statement of intent. She didn't say anything at first. She just looked at me for a long moment. The way you look at someone before you walk into something that neither of you can take back. The way you look at someone when you've spent 3 months watching them make a decision you don't understand and you've decided to stop trying to understand it and just be there when it lands. Then she said, "Last chance. Are you sure?" I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Okay. She took a breath. A real breath. The kind that fills the lungs all the way to the bottom. Let's go end your marriage. We walked into the courtroom at 9:50. It was smaller than I'd expected. Wood paneling. A judge's bench that looked like it had been there since the building was built. 2 tables facing the bench, separated by about 6 feet of carpet that had seen better decades. The room smelled like paper and old coffee and the faint institutional sadness of a place where things come apart. Mitchell was already there. He was wearing a charcoal suit and a maroon tie. The quarter zip was gone. The quarter zip was at the cottage in Jacksonville, probably folded in a drawer next to a bottle of lavender oil. He looked like a man who had dressed for an occasion he believed he had already won. Marcus was sitting next to him. Marcus was wearing the golf club tie. Again. The man owned exactly one tie he believed in, and he was going to wear it to every legal proceeding until that tie retired, or he did. I looked at those little printed golf clubs and I thought, that tie is going to have a very bad morning. The judge was a woman named Lorraine Macedo, mid-50s, reading glasses on a chain. The kind of judge who has watched 10,000 divorces walk through her courtroom and is no longer impressed by any of them. She had the calm, unhurried energy of a person who has seen every possible version of human failure and has learned to process it at a steady administrative pace. She looked at us over her glasses the way a librarian looks at people who are talking too loudly, except the library was a courtroom and the noise was 2 people's entire life together. She called the case. She read the preliminary terms. She asked both parties to confirm they had reviewed and agreed to the settlement, as outlined in the December 5th agreement. "Mr. Wells?" "Confirmed, Your Honor." Mitchell's voice was steady, a little proud even, the voice of a man who has been told yes and wants the room to hear him accept it gracefully. "Miss Nakamura-Wells?" "Confirmed, Your Honor." Carmen placed the signing folder in front of me. The pages were tabbed with small colored flags. There were a lot of pages. There are always a lot of pages. A marriage takes 9 years to build and approximately 47 pages to dismantle, not counting the exhibits. I picked up the pen. A black Bic courthouse standard, the kind of pen that costs about 30 cents and has signed 1,000 things worse than this. I looked at it for a moment. Then I started signing. I want you to picture me signing those pages. Slow, steady, each signature placed exactly on the line, exactly in the space provided. My hand did not shake. I had been waiting 2 years to sign these particular pages, and my hand had made a decision, somewhere between the parking garage and the grilled cheese and the thumpity thump thump, that it was not going to give Mitchell Wells the satisfaction of a tremor. The house in Ashland, page 6, signature. The cabin near Crater Lake, page 11, signature. Both vehicles. Page 15, signature. Wells Appraisal Group LLC, and all assets, liabilities, and obligations contained therein. Page 23, signature. Page after page after page. Each one a room I was walking out of. Each one a door I was closing behind me. Each one a thing I had loved that was no longer mine. except that it had never really been mine, because the thing inside it, the thing Mitchell didn't know about, had been ticking quietly for 3 weeks. Across the table, Mitchell was watching me sign with a small smile he was trying very hard not to wear. It was the smile of a man who is winning and knows he's winning and wants to be gracious about it but can't quite manage, because graciousness requires practice, and Mitchell had never practiced anything successfully except a wedding toast that still sounded like a shampoo bottle. Marcus was leaning back in his chair. Marcus was mentally on the back nine. Marcus was already composing the text message he was going to send to his golf buddies about how smoothly this had gone. I signed the last page. I set the pen down. I slid the folder across the table. The clerk took it. She was young, late 20s, with a side braid and the focused, efficient energy of someone who was 4 years into a job she genuinely liked. She brought the folder to her workstation at the side of the room and began entering the transfer into the system. I watched her face. I had been watching her face for the last 40 minutes, quietly, the way I watch everything, because she was the only person in that room who didn't know she was about to become important. Her face changed. It was a small change, the kind most people in the room would not have noticed, because most people in the room were not watching the clerk. They were watching each other, or looking at their phones, or doing the quiet mental arithmetic of people who believe the hard part is over. I was watching the clerk. She frowned. She typed something. She frowned again, deeper this time. She picked up the internal phone and said something quietly, her hand cupped around the receiver. She listened. She typed something else. Then she stood up, walked to the bench, leaned in close to Judge Macedo and whispered. Judge Macedo's reading glasses came down off her nose. Counsel, we're going to take a brief recess. 15 minutes. Marcus looked confused. Marcus's face, when confused, is a thing of genuine wonder. It is the face of a man who has been operating on the assumption that the world is a simple place and is now receiving evidence that it is not. He stood up and smoothed his tie. Your Honor, is there a... 15 minutes, Mr. Enfield. Marcus pulled out his phone. He stepped into the hallway. I could see him through the courtroom door, standing by the window, scrolling, and I watched his face change color in 3 distinct stages. First pink, the pink of mild alarm, then white, the white of comprehension, then a kind of grayish green that I have only ever seen on the faces of men who have just discovered that something they own is on fire and there is no extinguisher. Mitchell saw it too. His smile began to slide off his face the way water slides off a surface that was never designed to hold it. June, what is going on? I didn't answer. I just looked at him the way I have looked at spreadsheets for 15 years. With patience, with clarity, without any particular need to explain. Marcus came back in. He did not sit down. He grabbed Mitchell by the elbow, pulled him into the far corner, and started whispering with the ragged energy of a man trying to explain a house fire to the person who lit the match. I could hear fragments. Federal. An investigation. And you signed, and I told you to read, except Marcus had not told Mitchell to read anything because Marcus had not read anything himself, because Marcus Enfield had spent 3 months assuming that a woman in an $11 blazer was not capable of doing what I had done. The 15 minutes ended. Macedo came back in. She adjusted her glasses. Mr. Enfield, does your client wish to proceed? Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. He looked like a man trying to swallow a tennis ball politely. Your Honor, there appears to be could we have additional time to... The settlement has been signed and entered, Mr. Enfield. Are you suggesting that your client wishes to retract a signed settlement that he himself proposed? Marcus said nothing. There was nothing to say. You cannot retract a signed transfer of assets because you have just discovered that the assets contain a federal investigation. The law had let me hand Mitchell a building that was already on fire, and Mitchell had signed for it in front of a judge, a clerk, and a woman in a navy blazer who had paid $11 for the privilege of watching. Mitchell stood up. Your Honor, I'd like to... Mr. Wells, please sit down. He sat down slowly. The way a man sits down when his legs have stopped trusting his brain, he looked at me across the table, and his face was no longer trying to be anything. It was just his face. June, he said. And his voice did not sound like his voice. What did you do? I picked up my purse. I stood up. I looked at Carmen, who was sitting very still with the expression of a woman who has just realized that her client had been playing chess on a board she didn't know existed. Her pen was motionless on the legal pad. Her mouth was slightly open. I gave her a small nod. The nod said, "I'm sorry." The nod said, "Thank you." The nod said, "I'll explain everything, but not here." I looked back at Mitchell. "Everything you asked for, Mitchell. The house, the cars, the cabin near Crater Lake, the LLC, all of it, including what was inside it." His mouth opened, his mouth closed, his mouth opened again. I want to tell you he gave a big speech. He didn't. Real men in real rooms do not give big speeches when their lives have just landed on top of them. They open their mouths, and the air that comes out is not language. It is the sound of a plan collapsing. This isn't legal. Marcus, tell her this isn't." Marcus did not tell me anything. Marcus was holding his phone in both hands like a small animal that was quietly dying. Marcus was staring at the screen with the face of a man who has just realized that the golf clubs, the dinners, the wine trips, the cottage, and 4 years of unreported income are no longer theoretical problems, but federal ones. I walked out of the courtroom. My heels made a sound on the stone floor that I will remember for the rest of my life, because it was the sound of a woman walking away from something she had finished. I passed Bria Kavanaugh on the way to the elevator. She was sitting on a bench by the window, holding a manila folder, and wearing a coat that no longer fully closed over her stomach. 3 or 4 months, maybe. In her other hand, she was holding a small amber bottle, lavender oil, the sleep oil, the oil she had bought at a farm in Jacksonville 3 weeks ago from a woman she thought was a farmer and a woman she thought was learning to make soap. She looked up at me as I walked past. Her face was the face of a woman who did not yet know what she was about to find out. I didn't slow down, I didn't speed up. I pressed the button for the elevator. The doors opened, the doors closed, the elevator went down. I made it to my car. I sat down behind the wheel. And then, and only then, I let out a breath. I am fairly certain I had been holding since a Saturday night at the end of September, standing at a kitchen counter with miso soup on the back burner, listening to a man I had loved for 9 years tell me he wanted to evolve. I sat there for a long time with my hands on the steering wheel. Then I started the car. I drove straight to Medford. I did not go home first. I did not stop for gas or coffee or anything that might give my brain time to catch up with what my body had just done. I drove the 25 minutes from the courthouse to my mother's house on autopilot, the way you drive when the thinking part of you has temporarily stepped out and left the muscle memory in charge. My mother's house is a 1-story bungalow on a quiet street in Medford with a Japanese maple in the front yard that my father planted the year I was born. The tree is 35 years old now, the same age as me, and every November it turns a color that I can only describe as the red of something that has decided to be beautiful one last time before it lets go. It was that color when I pulled into the driveway. It was that color when I turned off the engine. It was that color when I sat in my car for about 2 minutes and looked at it and thought about my father who planted it and my mother who waters it and the fact that some things survive simply because someone keeps showing up. My mother answered the door in a housecoat with a pattern of small blue flowers on it, the same housecoat she has worn on weekday afternoons for as long as I can remember. She looked at my face. Whatever was on it, she read it instantly. The way mothers read. Not the words, not the expression, but the thing underneath both of those things, the thing you thought you were hiding, the thing you are never hiding from the woman who taught you how to hold a spoon. She didn't say anything. She just opened the door wider and stepped back. I sat down at her kitchen table. It is a small table, wooden, with a scratch on the left side where I dropped a cast iron teapot when I was 12. The scratch has been there for 23 years. My mother has never fixed it. I once asked her why, and she said, "Because you made it and I keep everything you make." She put a cup of green tea in front of me. She sat down across from me. She folded her hands on the table and waited. My mother is very good at waiting. She waited through my entire adolescence without once raising her voice. She waited through my father's illness without once asking why. She waited through 2 months of believing her daughter had lost her mind and surrendered her life to a man who said the word evolve like it was a personality. And she waited without judgment, which is not the same as without opinion, because Yoko Nakamura always has an opinion. She just knows when to hold it in her hands like a warm cup of tea and when to set it down on the table. I told her everything. From the beginning. The lawsuit in 2020. The file in the safe. The golf clubs from the shop in Bend. the cottage in Jacksonville. The receipt on the iPad next to the octopus documentary. Ruth, the lavender farm. Form 211. The fake strategy notes I fed to Carmen. The settlement conference where I signed away $600,000 while wearing an $11 blazer. The clerk. The recess. The look on Mitchell's face when the word federal reached him across a conference table. All of it. It took me about 40 minutes. I did not cry during the telling. I had already done my crying in a parking lot with a napkin from Breadboard Bakery, and I had done it in the front seat of a Subaru in a school parking lot, and I had done it 10 minutes ago in the elevator of the Jackson County Courthouse where nobody could see, and I was, for the moment, finished with crying. The telling was calm. The telling was the way I tell everything, which is with numbers and dates and details, and the occasional dry observation that is either humor or a defense mechanism, and is probably both. When I was done, my mother, Yoko Nakamura, 63 years old, retired piano teacher, who had spent 2 months telling everyone in Medford that her daughter had lost her mind, put both hands flat on the kitchen table and started to cry. Not big crying, quiet crying, the kind of crying women do when they have just realized they've been wrong about something important for a long time, the kind that comes from the chest, not the eyes, the kind that makes no sound at all, which is somehow worse than every other kind. "Honey," she said, "I am so sorry about the mochi. It was good mochi, Mom. I'm so sorry about the magazine. The magazine was a lot. I didn't. I know you didn't. I couldn't tell you. You couldn't tell me because I would have told Mrs. Greenbaum. You would have told Mrs. Greenbaum before you got to the end of the driveway." She laughed. A small, wet laugh. The kind of laugh that happens when crying and relief collide in the same breath. She stood up and walked around the table and put her arms around me. She smelled like the same drugstore hand cream she has been using since I was 8 years old. Jergens. Original scent. The smell of every hug, every sick day, every morning before school, every evening after a bad day. The smell of a woman who has been showing up for 35 years without once needing to be asked. We stood there in her kitchen for a long time. The afternoon light was coming through the window above the sink, making a warm rectangle on the tile floor. The Japanese maple outside was glowing. The house was quiet, the way houses are quiet when something difficult has just ended, and something else has not yet begun. She pulled back. She wiped her eyes with a paper napkin. She looked at me. She said, "Do you want some mochi?" "Yes," I said. She went to the refrigerator and came back with a lacquered box I recognized. Matcha mochi, homemade, dusted with potato starch. She set it on the table between us and opened the lid, and we sat there in her kitchen eating mochi and not talking, and it was the best conversation I'd had in months. It is a Sunday morning in late January. I am sitting at my kitchen table in the house in Ashland that no longer belongs to me, technically, except that the federal lien on it means it doesn't really belong to anyone right now, which is its own kind of legal limbo that I am letting somebody else worry about. Somebody with a badge and a government email address and a very specific interest in the bookkeeping practices of Wells Appraisal Group, LLC. Suki is across from me eating pancakes. She is eating them with her fingers, which is wrong, which I am letting happen because it is Sunday, and she is 8, and the pancakes are good, and because there are certain battles a mother chooses not to fight on mornings when the light is coming through the kitchen window at exactly the right angle and the house is quiet and nobody is asking anyone to evolve. She is wearing a t-shirt with constellations on it. There is a small spot of maple syrup on Orion's belt. Neither of us has acknowledged it. Orion will survive. The Subaru is in the driveway, paid off, in my name. My 401k, which I had kept separate from the marriage from the beginning because Ruth told me to in 2015, back when she was still an active agent and I was still a junior auditor who thought she was being paranoid, is sitting at $318,000 and growing. I still have my job at Cascade Timber and Furnishings, where I spend my days staring at spreadsheets full of white oak board feet and dovetail joints and hardware margins. I have never been happier to stare at a spreadsheet full of white oak board feet and dovetail joints and hardware margins in my entire life. I am reading the local business section of the Ashland Daily Tidings. There is a small article on page B3. The article notes that Wells Appraisal Group, LLC, an Ashland-based commercial property appraisal firm, has come under federal investigation in connection with what investigators are describing as several years of unreported income. The article mentions the company's owner of record by name. The name is not Mitchell Wells. The name is the one that has been on every legal document since 2020, because Mitchell never moved it back, because Mitchell never thought to check, because Mitchell had been married to a forensic accountant for 9 years and had never once considered the possibility that she was paying attention. Mitchell's name appears later in the article, identified as the company's operating principal. The article notes that he has retained new counsel. Marcus Enfield is not mentioned. I imagine Marcus is currently spending a great deal of time in a small office somewhere being yelled at by a different lawyer. I imagine the golf club tie is not helping. I fold the paper. I set it down. Suki looks up from her pancake. Mom, did you know that Cassiopeia was a queen who was so beautiful the gods put her in the sky, but they made her sit upside down half the time so she'd stay humble? I did not know that, baby. That's kind of mean, but also kind of fair. It really is, baby. I take a sip of my coffee. Outside, the sun is coming through the trees behind the house. The kitchen is warm. The phone is not ringing. The list in my notebook has not been updated in 6 weeks, which is the longest I have gone without writing in it since October, and I think that means something. I think it means the list is done. I think it means I am done counting. You know, it's amazing what you can get away with when nobody expects you to be thinking. Suki nods very seriously, the way 8-year-olds nod when they've decided to file something away for later. Then she asks me if Orion and Cassiopeia are ever in the sky at the same time. I tell her I'm not sure, but that we can look it up after breakfast. She says okay. She goes back to her pancake. I go back to my coffee. Then I stand up. I walk into the kitchen. I pull out the flour. I pull out the pork. I pull out the cabbage. And I start kneading. Gyoza. New ones. The dough is cool under my hands. The morning is quiet. Suki is humming something from the kitchen table that sounds like it might be Frosty the Snowman, but might also be something she invented, because 8-year-olds do not always distinguish between existing songs and songs they are creating in real time, and honestly, neither should the rest of us. This time, I don't count. So I want to ask you something, and I really want to know, would you have done it the same way? Would you have walked away from a house and a cabin near Crater Lake in the car you drove to your daughter's school concert? Would you have handed all of it over on purpose, knowing what was inside it, knowing what was coming, knowing that the consequences would arrive in a federal envelope instead of a courtroom victory? Was that justice or was that something else? I'm not sure I know the answer myself. Some days I think I do, some days I'm not so sure. Tell me honestly. I want to read what you think. And I want to say something else before I go. God puts people in your path for a reason. Sometimes the reason is a jar of lavender honey at a farmer's market. Sometimes it's a woman in a pencil skirt who refuses to stop adding footnotes. Sometimes it's a mother who shows up with mochi and doesn't understand and loves you anyway. God gives us what we can carry. And then he gives us the people who help us carry it. And then, if we're very lucky, he gives us a Sunday morning with pancakes and a daughter who knows the names of the stars. I have been blessed beyond what I deserve, and I know it, and I will not forget it. A woman wrote to me a few months back. She lives somewhere in rural Vermont. She didn't say where exactly. She said that listening to these stories makes her feel less alone in her own quiet kitchen at 5 in the morning before her grandchildren wake up. I have thought about that sentence approximately 400 times since she wrote it. If you're that woman, or if you're a woman like her, or if you're anyone at all sitting somewhere at any hour with a cup of something warm and a story you haven't told yet, thank you. Thank you for being here. God bless every single one of you. There's another story already waiting on your screen, and I think you're going to love it. Go on. I'll see you over there.